Hey, what you reading for?
I like when a book challenges me psychologically, emotionally, intellectually. So a few months ago, Pan Macmillan put out a list, the most challenging books you will ever read. So in this video, we are going to take a look at the list together and see what books from the list I've read already, what I think of them. And hopefully I'll find a few titles that I can add to my TBR. Afterwards, I want to share with you my suggestions of the most difficult or most challenging books. Should be fun.
Thank you for hitting the like button. Consider subscribing if you haven't already. Check out my books, especially if you like your fiction dark and weird, available through Amazon in ebook or paperback. Descriptions and links in the show notes.
Now, let's dive in. We have two categories. We have classics and then more contemporary difficult books. And we'll start with the classics. We'll kick things off with Don Quixote by Miguel Cervantes. This book is well over 1,000 pages, and it is credited as being one of the first novels ever. So when this book came out, the idea of a narrative structure for a novel or narrative story arc that really didn't exist. So this book has a reputation of being kind of meandering in its storytelling. I am grateful that this book exists. I'm grateful to Cervantes for producing it. It obviously has done a lot for what we know today as the novel form and novel storytelling. However, at this point in 2025, I don't feel the need to read it, and I think I'm going to skip on Don Quixote. Next up, we have Bleak House by Charles Dickens. And this book is 1,300 pages, more or less. And it has a myriad of characters from all walks of life. I don't generally do well with books that have a lot of characters. I'm bad with names generally in life, and that's also true in the fiction that I read. So books with a lot of characters, they do present a problem to me. But as I said, I do want to be challenged. My experience with Charles Dickens has not been great, if I'm being honest. I've tried to read Great Expectations. I've tried twice, and both times I couldn't make it past the halfway point, really. I understand that Charles Dickens has a lot of fans, a lot of people who appreciate his writing. I'm not saying he's not a good writer. He doesn't produce great work. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that for me, I haven't had success with him before. And I don't really feel like giving Charles Dickens a third chance. So I'm going to pass on Bleak House. Next up, we have Moby Dick from Herman Melville. I'm not surprised to find this book on the list. This has a reputation of being a challenging book, not a conventional narrative structure. Herman Melville transforms the little world of the whale ship into a crucible where mankind's fears, faith, and frailties are pitted against a relentless fate. That does sound intriguing. With an unconventional structure, experimental styles, and long digressions and ruminations from the central character, there is plenty for readers to unpack. I do appreciate unconventional structures. And I've heard that this book is, the chapters are separated by passages or digressions involving whale anatomy or whale biology. And to be honest with you, that does appeal to me. I know very little about whales, so the idea of reading a classic novel and then learning a lot about whales, that appeals to me. So Moby Dick is on my radar. I could see myself reading this book, and I feel like maybe I should read it. I've heard mixed opinions. Either you love it or you don't. But I think with the right frame of mind, I think I could love this book. Moving on to The Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf. I see this book come up on lots of lists, greatest books of all time, and that's what. I've only had one experience with Virginia Woolf, and I read Mrs. Dalloway, and it went over my head, really. I would like to give her another chance, or give myself another chance with her work. Maybe To the Lighthouse. Let's find out what it's about. Written from the perspective of one's inner voice, you are thrown straight into a blurred mesh of the Ramses family's thoughts and actions. Without the aid of frequent punctuation or consistent dialogue to carry you through, you'll need to employ fierce levels of concentration to distinguish whose inner monologue you're in and what time of day it is. It's no easy task. If you look away for one moment, you're lost, but we promise that you will come away having learnt much about the complexity of human relationships. This sounds like a book that is going to be challenging for me, that is going to go over my head, much like Mrs. Dalloway went over my head. Mrs. Dalloway, I did not find the writing difficult. I mean, I would read a paragraph and it would be easy. I would understand the paragraph. But then after 10 or 20 pages, I realized I really don't know what's going on in this story, and I really don't know who these people are or what they want. So I think that Virginia Woolf probably demands a lot of concentration. I don't know if I have that level of concentration in me, sadly. So the lack of punctuation isn't a deal breaker for me. But Virginia Woolf intimidates me. Who's afraid of Virginia Woolf? I am. I'm afraid of Virginia Woolf. Moving on, Finnegan's Wake. Again, not a surprise to see this title on the list. This has a reputation of being one of the most difficult books ever written. I've only had one experience with James Joyce. I read Dubliners, which is a collection of loosely connected short stories. They all take place in the city of Dublin. And because they're loosely connected short stories about one city, I couldn't help comparing it to Winesburg, Ohio. And in my opinion, it didn't live up to the comparison. So I'm not exactly eager to have another James Joyce experience, but I am open to it. This novel begins in the middle of a sentence, okay? And then it ends in the middle of that same sentence. Okay, I like that. Giving it a circular structure with a whole load of dreamy, nonsensical language existing in between as a stream of consciousness. Stream of consciousness is not a selling point for me. I generally don't do well as a reader with these types of books. Generally. You could argue that Prophet Song has a stream of consciousness style to the writing. And I did like Prophet Song. I don't know if that's a true example of stream of consciousness, though. And the made-up language, I like that idea of the made-up language. I don't know if I would like that for extended passages, which I think is the case here with Finnegan's Wake. Don't worry, there'll be no shame if you admit you cannot understand this book. It's definitely a universal feeling. But you'll still be left with a triumphant feeling at the end of it, having read perhaps the most challenging novel of all time. I want more from a novel than like a badge, like congratulations, you finished this. I want a little bit more. Next up, we have Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. From Tolstoy, I've only read essays and letters. I've never read one of his novels before. This is over 1,000 pages, 1,100 pages, and it has a reputation of being one of the greatest novels ever written. So based on that reputation, I am intrigued. I want to read it as well. I am intimidated by the size, 1,100 pages, over 1,100 pages. I did have an experience, I guess maybe 12 years ago. Back in 2013, I saw an opera that was based on this book, a contemporary opera. And it didn't do much for me. Although it's tough to get a sense of the story in an opera. But yeah, even having seen the opera, I couldn't tell you what the story was about. But I was not really gripped by this opera experience. Based on the reputation of this book, it's definitely on my radar. Next up, we have another book by Tolstoy, and that is War and Peace, which comes in at around 1,400 pages. That's a lot to ask. And this is a bit of historical fiction because it takes place during the Napoleonic Wars, interweaved with a huge cast from aristocrats and peasants to soldiers and Napoleon himself. War and Peace is challenging on several levels. The size of the book, firstly, There's also a long list of characters to follow. That doesn't bode well for me. Historical and political context is important. I like historical fiction, and a book set in Russia during the Napoleonic Wars, that does sound intriguing to me. I am intimidated by the size, and I'm intimidated by the long list of characters. I think if I'm going to choose a Tolstoy book to read, it's going to be Anna Karenina, more so than War and Peace. Now we'll move on to more contemporary difficult books. And starting off this category is Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. Now, I have read Blood Meridian, and it is dark, it is disturbing, it is depraved. I did not find it particularly difficult to read. I mean, I read a lot of horror, so dark and disturbing and depraved, that's kind of my bag. I did not find this a particularly difficult book to read. However, I also did not completely understand everything that was going on. I will admit to that. This is not a book that spells everything out to the reader, and thankfully so, because what is really going on is quite disturbing, so I'm thankful that it wasn't spelled out for me. But there's enough spelling going on that you get a sense of how depraved this book is. I liked it. I mean, it's an enjoyable book. It's very, very well written. But it is a tough read just because we're dealing with despicable people doing despicable things. Next up, A Little Life by Hanya Yangihara. Sorry for the pronunciation. This is a book that I see come up on a lot of booktube channels, and the reactions are either they love it or they absolutely hate it. A strong contender for one of the most addictively depressing books you'll ever read. Prepare for a gut punch on each of its 752 pages of beautifully explored misery. I think at this point in my life, I don't need a beautiful exploration of misery. It's definitely not the right time for me to be doing that, and I don't know if that time will come. Also, I'm a bit distracted by the cover. Is it just me, or does anyone else look at the cover and see James Franco? I can't get that out of my head. But apparently it's not a book about James Franco. Then why is he on the cover? Maybe it's just me. Moving on. Next up, we have Underworld by Don DeLillo. Now, I've had one experience with Don DeLillo, and that was with Cosmopolis, and I didn't care for the book, to be honest with you. You ever had this experience where there's an author you feel like you need to read, and then you can't decide, should I read this book that was a big hit for them, or should I read that book, which was also a big hit for them? And then you choose a book, and then you don't like it. So what do you do then? Are you going to give that author a second chance and try their other book? So this happened to me with Don DeLillo. I was feeling like he's an important writer. I need to experience his work. So do I go for Cosmopolis or do I go for White Noise? And I went with Cosmopolis and didn't like it. So now what do? Do I give him another chance? And if I give him another chance, do I try White Noise or do I go with Underworld? Let's find out more about Underworld. We weave in and out of a number of intertwined themes, including baseball. I like baseball. Waste disposal. Okay. Guns. And the Cold War. But what also challenges us is its exhausting roster of disparate characters. An exhausting roster of characters. That's tough. So this book deals a lot with American politics, I think, which I have little interest in. I have little interest in American politics, and I have even less patience for it. Yeah. So a book that deals with those themes, it's not likely to resonate with me. So moving on. A Time Outside This Time So speaking of American politics, from what I understand about this book is that there's a lot of American politics and relatively current or recent ones because this book came out in only a few years ago. It deals with themes like fake news, a global pandemic, and a president that goes on tirades on social media. So this is playing a little bit too close to current political events for me to be interested in it. However, braving through its complexities rewards readers with a profound reflection of our post-truth era, making it a consequential read that resonates strikingly with current times. Okay, and I'm sure it does. I personally do not want to resonate with current times. I'm not a man of this time. I was born too late. I should have been born a long, long time ago in a different time. I think things would have been better for me. This time we're living in now, it's not for me. There was a time, like long time ago, when like the village would get together and they would take a goat, right? And they would put all their sins on the goat, and then they would send the goat out of town, like with their sins along with them. So then when the goat leaves, then the village can be guilt-free and get on with their lives, and everybody gets along. I should have been born back then. Now when I ask my neighbors to put our sins on a goat and send them out of town, they just look at me like I'm crazy. I should have been born back then, right? Moving on, we have XX, Dos Equis, or maybe it's 20 in Roman numerals, I'm not sure, XX, by Rian Hughes. Now, I've heard good things about this book. Wrapping stories within stories, as well as featuring NASA transcripts, newspaper articles, artwork, and Wikipedia pages, you could call this novel the Moby Dick of sci-fi. Sounds a little bit like maybe the House of Leaves of sci-fi too. The Moby Dick of sci-fi, but even longer. Okay, if you do manage to decipher the narrative, you'll enjoy a story of what might happen in the wake of the biggest scientific discovery in human history. So it does kind of sound like the House of Leaves of sci-fi, and I'm a huge fan of House of Leaves. So that does intrigue me a little bit, and I have heard really good things about this book. So it's on my radar. I like deciphering a narrative. When I was a little kid, I wanted to be a detective because I used to read these children's books called Encyclopedia Brown, and I thought he was just the coolest, smartest, cleverest kid. So maybe I could tap back into those childhood dreams and put on my detective hat and decipher the narrative of Dos Equis. Moving on. Dune by Frank Herbert. Now this is a book, so many people have told me I should read Dune, and I'm inclined to believe them. I don't read a lot of sci-fi, but I feel like maybe this one I should read. I've stayed away from this book mainly because I get a sense that it's dealing with a lot of politics, geopolitics, international politics by creating these analogies and similar conflicts, but placing them in a different world that science fiction often does. And because I'm aggressively disinterested in politics, I've stayed away from Dune because of that. However, enough people have told me that despite my misgivings that I should read Dune anyway because it's extraordinary and I will like it. It's on my TBR, but it's in there in pencil, if you will. So that's the list presented to us from Pan Macmillan. I think it's a pretty good list. I think from this list, Anna Karenina is probably the highest one on there that I feel like I should read. Moby Dick and Dune. I think if I were to pick three, it would be those three, and in that order. Now, I would like to share my suggestions of what I think are the most difficult books I have read or have tried to read. And the first I'll mention is A Girl is a Half-Formed Thing by Amir McBride from 2013. Now, this book first came on my radar because it's a Galley Beggar book. And this is a publisher in the UK, that independent publisher, and I think they put out great work. They take a lot of chances with their books. They put out things that other publishers wouldn't touch, wouldn't have the courage to. So when they come out with a book, it's immediately gets my attention. And I tried to read this book, but I did not get very far. And it's a short book too, by the way. I did not make it very far in this book, and I'll tell you why. I'll read a few sentences for you. For you, you'll give her name. In the stitches of her skin, she'll wear your say. Mammy, me? Yes, you. Bounce the bed, I'd say. I'd say that's what you did. Then lay you down. They cut you round, wait and hour and day. So this is the style of the narration, and it goes on like this for 200 pages or so. Many readers who manage to stick with the story all the way to the end, they give it rave reviews. I'm inclined to believe that if I were to stick with it, I would also get something out of it. Although I tried once and failed miserably, and I don't know if I have it in me to try again. Another book that I found difficult to read was Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel, and I did manage to finish this one, and I thought it was excellent. It's historical fiction set in the early 16th century, and we have a lot of characters, and it's quite an immersive experience because I really felt like I was back in the early 16th century in England and dealing with these political and religious conflicts and in the politics of that day. Essentially, the king wants to get a divorce. In order for him to do that, he needs the Pope. He needs to grant him this divorce. And so the king, he elicits the help of Thomas Cromwell, a guy who knows how to get things done, right, with these leveraging people's political ambitions and so forth. So there are a lot of characters, and they all have agendas that they hide from others. And it's difficult to follow, but it created an immersive experience that I thoroughly enjoyed. And lastly, I will mention Saibo There Below by Laszlo Krasznahorkai. So this is a book from a Hungarian author, a well-regarded Hungarian author, and I was living in Hungary and I wanted to discover Hungarian literature. So somebody gave me this book, and Laszlo Krasznahorkai is an example of one of those authors who does not punctuate. There are no paragraph breaks, well, very few paragraph breaks. So you just get pages and pages of big chunks of words running together, right? No punctuation, no paragraph breaks. So it's intimidating, and it's about 450 pages. And the gist of the story, if there is a story, it is that the Japanese goddess Saibo returns to the mortal realm in order to try to find perfection. That synopsis I got from Goodreads. I do not remember that from actually reading the story. Essentially what this is quite anecdotal. It's different stories or passages that focus on artists or craftsmen who are trying to achieve perfection with their art or their craft. So we have painters painstakingly mixing their paints. We have sculptors with fine instruments fretting about little slivers of rock they're going to cut out. It is not an easy read. I think it is the kind of book that people say they like because it makes them sound intelligent. But it is also a good book. I mean, I liked it. Do you have any experience with any of the books on this list or any of the books I talked about in this video? I would love to hear your opinions about them, and I look forward to connecting with you in the comment section. Thank you for watching. I'll see you at the next video.